This story is based on true events. I never believed in ghosts. I thought myself too pragmatic, too grounded in reality to be swayed by old wives' tales and superstitions. That was until I received the letter. It arrived on a cold, rainy afternoon, its envelope yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting, though elegant, was unmistakably hurried, as if the writer had been driven by some urgent compulsion. The letter was an invitation to Ravenwood Manor, a sprawling estate located deep within the woods of New England. The manor had been abandoned for over a century, a relic of a bygone era, and its reputation for being haunted was legendary. The invitation was a peculiar mix of formality and eerie familiarity, addressed to me by name and signed only with the initials EV. My initial instinct was to ignore it, to dismiss it as a prank or a mistake. But something about the letter intrigued me. Perhaps it was the mysterious aura that seemed to emanate from the very parchment. The invitation spoke of an important discovery, a revelation that could change everything I thought I knew about the supernatural. It promised answers to questions I hadn't even thought to ask. So, against my better judgment, I decided to go. The journey to Ravenwood Manor was as unsettling as the invitation itself. The roads grew narrower and more treacherous as I drove deeper into the forest. The canopy of trees overhead seemed to close in, their twisted branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The fog that rolled in from the horizon clung to the landscape, wrapping everything in a dense, opaque shroud. It was as if the world itself was conspiring to keep me from reaching my destination. When I finally arrived at the manor, night had fully descended, and the full moon cast an eerie glow over the estate. The mansion loomed before me, its silhouette stark against the darkened sky. It was a grandiose structure, with gabled roofs and intricate ironwork, but years of neglect had taken their toll. The windows were shattered, the doors hanging ajar, and the once proud garden was now a tangled mess of weeds and overgrown foliage. I approached the front door, which creaked open with a groan that echoed through the empty halls. The interior was cloaked in darkness, the only illumination coming from the moonlight filtering through the broken windows. The air was thick with dust, and every step I took disturbed the layers of grime that had settled over the years. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional scurrying of rats or the distant rustle of something unseen. As I ventured further into the manor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Shadows seemed to move just beyond my field of vision, and strange noises echoed through the empty rooms. It was as though the house itself was alive, watching, waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity, or perhaps something more sinister, kept me moving forward. It was then that I stumbled upon a room at the far end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered within. As I pushed it open, I was met with a sight that would haunt my dreams for years to come. The room was filled with old portraits, their eyes seeming to follow me with an unsettling intensity. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. Yet, despite the grime, the reflection it cast was unsettlingly clear. As I stared into the mirror, I felt a chill run down my spine. The room behind me seemed to shift and distort, the shadows elongating and writhing. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the flickering light extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. I was left alone, with only the sound of my own breathing and the relentless beating of my heart to keep me company. It was at that moment that I realized I had stepped into something far beyond my understanding. The invitation, the manor, the shadows, everything had been a prelude to something much darker, something that I was only beginning to comprehend. The darkness pressed in around me, a suffocating void that seemed to consume all sound and light. My breath quickened, each exhale forming a fleeting mist in the cold air. The mirror's reflection had vanished, but the feeling of being watched remained, intensifying with each passing second. I fumbled in my pocket for a flashlight, my hands trembling as I turned it on. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the dusty portraits that lined the walls. The eyes of the figures in the paintings seemed to follow me, their expressions ranging from serene to malevolent. I could almost hear their whispers, a cacophony of voices that grew louder and more frantic as I moved closer to the mirror. The mirror itself was an imposing piece, its ornate frame intricately carved with patterns of twisted vines and grotesque faces. Despite the layer of grime, the glass surface seemed unnaturally clean, almost too pristine for its age. I approached it cautiously, my flashlight casting erratic shadows that danced across the room. As I drew closer, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. My breath became visible, forming small clouds that dissipated quickly. I reached out to wipe the dust from the mirror's surface, my hand trembling with anticipation. As I did, the reflection began to shift, warping and distorting in a way that defied logic. The mirror revealed something that made my heart race, a vision of the room as it once was. The decay and disrepair vanished, replaced by an opulent ballroom filled with elegantly dressed people. They danced and laughed, their movements graceful and fluid. But the joy of the scene was tainted by an underlying sense of dread. The guests seemed to be trapped in an endless waltz, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and sorrow. The vision shifted abruptly, and the room was filled with a cacophony of screams and chaos. The guests in the reflection began to claw at their faces, their screams becoming desperate cries for help. The floor of the ballroom cracked open, revealing a churning void beneath. One by one, the guests were pulled into the darkness, their screams echoing through the mirror and reverberating in my ears. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering erratically as I tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls warping and distorting as if the manor itself were reacting to the horrors revealed in the mirror. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, reaching out with dark, sinuous tendrils. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled like water, and a cold, clammy hand reached out from within. It was followed by another, and another, until a figure began to emerge from the glass. The figure was gaunt and hollow-eyed, its face a twisted mask of anguish. It reached toward me with a trembling hand, its fingers elongated and claw-like. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of despair wash over me. It was as if the figure was pleading for release, trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. I wanted to look away, but my body was frozen, unable to break free from the figure's haunting gaze. As the figure continued to emerge from the mirror, the room around me began to collapse. The walls crumbled, the floor gave way, and the ceiling seemed to cave in. The manor was no longer a structure of solid wood and stone, but a writhing mass of shadows and darkness. The mirror's reflection became a portal to a nightmarish abyss, and the figure was only the beginning of the horrors that awaited. With a final, desperate effort, I turned and fled from the room, my flashlight casting erratic beams of light as I navigated the collapsing manor. The screams of the trapped souls echoed through the corridors, mingling with the sound of splintering wood and falling debris. I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness closing in, threatening to consume me just as it had the guests in the mirror's vision. I burst through the front door of the manor, the night air hitting me with a jolt. The fog had thickened, enveloping the estate in a suffocating embrace. I ran down the steps, my footsteps echoing on the cold, damp ground. The manor loomed behind me, its dark silhouette barely visible through the swirling mist. As I made my way back to my car, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the manor's windows flickering with a ghostly light. The shadows within seemed to pulse and writhe, as if something, or someone, was still trapped inside. The invitation, the mirror, and the figure were all pieces of a puzzle I had yet to fully understand. But one thing was certain: Ravenwood Manor was no ordinary place, and its dark secrets were far from over. I sped away from Ravenwood Manor, the oppressive weight of my experience pressing heavily upon me. The fog that had once obscured my view now seemed to cling to my car, distorting the road ahead and making every turn and curve feel uncertain. My mind raced, trying to process the nightmarish scenes I had witnessed and the chilling presence that had emerged from the mirror. The drive back to town was a blur. The familiar streets of Salem appeared foreign and disorienting, their normalcy contrasting sharply with the horrors I had just escaped. I parked my car at the first available place, a small, dimly lit motel that seemed to offer nothing more than a semblance of safety. As I entered my room, the sense of dread didn't dissipate. If anything, it seemed to follow me, a shadow lurking in every corner. Unable to sleep, I sat in the flickering light of the motel's bedside lamp, the events of the night replaying in my mind. The figure from the mirror haunted my thoughts, its anguished face a persistent image that I couldn't shake. I needed answers, and I needed them quickly. The next morning, I sought out the local historian in Salem, an elderly woman named Margaret Hughes, who had a reputation for knowing everything about the town's dark past. I found her in a small, cluttered office filled with books and artifacts. Her sharp eyes and knowing smile greeted me as I recounted my experience at Ravenwood Manor. Margaret listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as I described the mirror, the ballroom, and the figure. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. "You've encountered something very old," she said slowly, her voice tinged with an almost reverent fear. Ravenwood Manor was built by the Ravenscroft family, prominent figures in Salem's history. They were known for their involvement in the occult, dabbling in rituals and dark ceremonies that many believed to be forbidden. I felt a chill run down my spine. But what about the mirror? What did I see? Margaret's gaze grew distant, as if she was searching for the right words. The mirror is said to be a gateway, a conduit between our world and something far darker. The Ravenscrofts were rumored to have made a pact with entities from beyond, using the mirror to summon and trap spirits. The ballroom you saw was their grand hall, where they held their ceremonies. The guests trapped in that vision were likely victims of their dark rituals. I was stunned. So, what's the purpose of the invitation? Why was I brought there? Margaret's face darkened. The Ravenscrofts' practices were intended to bind spirits to their will. The invitation might have been a way to lure someone who could potentially help finish what they started. Or perhaps it was a way to trap someone new, to continue their twisted legacy. I felt a mix of fear and determination. If what Margaret said was true, then I had to find a way to stop whatever malevolent force was at work. Is there a way to break the pact? To free the souls trapped in the mirror? Margaret nodded slowly. There are old rituals and rites that can be used to undo such dark pacts, but they require knowledge, strength, and a willingness to face whatever horrors lie within. If you're serious about this, you'll need to gather information from historical records, old texts, and perhaps even confront the manor again. With a heavy heart, I left Margaret's office, my mind filled with both dread and resolve. The idea of returning to Ravenwood Manor was terrifying, but I knew I couldn't walk away from this. The souls trapped in the mirror, the dark legacy of the Ravenscrofts, and the malevolent presence I had encountered demanded a resolution. Over the following days, I delved into Salem's history, poring over old texts, records, and accounts of the Ravenscrofts and their dark rituals. Each discovery seemed to draw me deeper into the shadowy realm they had once inhabited. The more I learned, the clearer it became that confronting the manor again was the only way to bring closure to the tormented souls and put an end to the Ravenscrofts' dark legacy. Armed with knowledge and an unsettling resolve, I returned to Ravenwood Manor. The fog had lifted, but a sense of foreboding still hung in the air. The manor loomed before me, its once grand facade now a mere shell of its former self. I knew this time would be different. I was no longer an unwitting visitor, but someone with a purpose, to confront the darkness and break the pact that bound the souls. Entering the manor again, I felt the weight of its history pressing down on me. The once oppressive silence was now punctuated by distant whispers, echoes of the spirits trapped within. The mirror, still standing in the ballroom, awaited me. I approached it with a mix of dread and determination, armed with the rituals and incantations I had learned. As I recited the ancient rites, the shadows in the room began to writhe and twist, coalescing into dark forms that seemed to reach out toward me. The mirror's surface rippled, and the anguished faces of the trapped souls appeared once more. Their cries of desperation filled the room, a haunting symphony of suffering. With each incantation, the power of the pact seemed to weaken, the shadows retreating and the cries growing fainter. I felt a growing sense of resistance, as if the malevolent force within the mirror was fighting back, trying to preserve its hold over the spirits. But I pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the soul's freedom depended on my success. Finally, with a final, forceful utterance of the last ritual, the mirror shattered, its surface fracturing into 1,000 shards that fell to the ground. The oppressive darkness lifted, and a blinding light filled the room. The faces of the trapped souls appeared one last time, their expressions now peaceful and free. As the light enveloped them, they vanished, leaving the manor bathed in a sense of calm. Exhausted but relieved, I left Ravenwood Manor behind. The fog had lifted, and the once malevolent atmosphere had dissipated. The manor, though still old and decaying, no longer felt oppressive. I had confronted the darkness, faced the horrors of the past, and freed the souls that had been bound to the mirror. As I drove away, I felt a profound sense of closure. Ravenwood Manor was no longer a place of fear and despair, but a reminder of the power of knowledge and the courage to confront the unknown. Weeks had passed since the confrontation at Ravenwood Manor, but the experience had left an indelible mark on my life. The fog that had once shrouded the manor had lifted, but the shadows of what I had witnessed lingered in my mind. The townspeople of Salem spoke of the manor's newfound tranquility, but I knew that the peace was fragile, a mere veneer over the dark history that still echoed through the halls. One evening, while reviewing my notes and recordings from the manor, I received another unexpected letter. This one was different from the first, new and pristine, its envelope white and unblemished. It was addressed to me by name, but there was no return address, only a single line written in a neat, precise hand. "Thank you for freeing them. The cycle continues." A chill ran down my spine as I read the message. The words were ambiguous, but carried a sense of foreboding. I couldn't ignore it. The sense that there was more to the story than what I had uncovered tugged at me. I decided to dig deeper, hoping to uncover any remaining threads of the Ravenscroft legacy. My research led me to an old, dusty library in the heart of Salem. It was a place where the past seemed to breathe in every creak of the wooden floor and rustle of ancient pages. I met with a historian named Elias Green, a man with a deep understanding of Salem's occult history. I showed him the letter and described my experiences with Ravenwood Manor. Elias's eyes widened as he read the letter. The Ravenscrofts were notorious for their belief in cycles of power and rebirth, he explained. They believed that by creating a cycle of torment and release, they could harness and perpetuate their power across generations. Your actions may have disrupted one part of their plan, but it's possible that another cycle was set into motion. I was troubled by his words. What does that mean for me? And for Salem? Elias's face grew solemn. It means that while you may have freed the souls trapped in the mirror, the Ravenscroft's influence could still be at work. They may have set other plans in motion, other cycles that could come to fruition. The message you received suggests that their legacy is not finished and that you might still be involved. Determined to understand the full scope of the Ravenscroft's influence, I delved deeper into the library's archives, examining old manuscripts and texts related to their rituals. The more I read, the clearer it became that the Ravenscroft's dark practices had left a lasting imprint on Salem and beyond. Their rituals were designed to bind and perpetuate their power, creating cycles that could span generations. I discovered references to other locations and artifacts connected to the Ravenscrofts, including hidden chambers and ancient texts believed to hold the key to understanding and possibly dismantling their dark legacy. The realization that I was entangled in a larger, ongoing cycle made me more resolute. I needed to uncover the full extent of their machinations to prevent any further harm. Armed with new knowledge and a sense of urgency, I set out to explore the additional sites connected to the Ravenscrofts. Each location presented its own challenges: ancient symbols, hidden passages, and traps designed to protect the secrets of the past. The deeper I went, the more I felt the weight of the Ravenscrofts' presence, as if their shadows were reaching out to ensnare me. One night, after weeks of investigation, I stumbled upon a hidden chamber beneath an old chapel on the outskirts of Salem. The chamber was a grim testament to the Ravenscroft's dark practices, filled with ancient relics and arcane symbols. In the center of the room stood a pedestal with a book bound in leather, its cover adorned with the same grotesque faces I had seen in the mirror. With trembling hands, I opened the book and began to read. It detailed a final ritual, a ceremony intended to seal the Ravenscroft's influence and break the cycle once and for all. The ritual required precise actions, specific locations, and a deep understanding of their occult practices. As I studied the text, I realized that the ritual would be dangerous and demanding, but it was the only way to end their legacy. The night of the ritual arrived, and I returned to Ravenwood Manor, now a mere shell of its former self, but still holding a dark allure. With the knowledge from the book, I performed the ritual in the ballroom, the same room where I had first encountered the mirror. The air was thick with anticipation and dread as I recited the incantations and performed the necessary actions. As I completed the final steps, a powerful surge of energy filled the room. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, and the air grew heavy with a palpable tension. For a moment, it felt as though the manor itself was fighting against the ritual, its dark essence resisting the attempt to break the cycle. But then, as I reached the climax of the ritual, a blinding light erupted from the center of the ballroom, engulfing the entire space. When the light faded, the manor was still and silent. The oppressive darkness had lifted, and the sense of malevolent presence had vanished. The cycle that had once perpetuated the Ravenscroft's dark legacy had been broken. I stood alone in the now empty ballroom, the weight of the ritual and the history finally lifting from my shoulders. With the Ravenscroft's influence severed and their cycles of torment ended, Ravenwood Manor was no longer a place of fear and darkness. The town of Salem slowly began to recover from the shadows of its past, and the once haunted manor was left behind as a relic of a bygone era. I left Salem with a profound sense of closure, knowing that I had confronted and dismantled a dark legacy that had plagued the town for generations. The experience had changed me, and while the shadows of Ravenwood Manor would always linger in my memory, I took solace in the knowledge that I had brought peace to the tormented souls and ended the cycle of the Ravenscroft's influence. As I drove away from Salem, the early morning sun rose on the horizon, casting a warm and hopeful light over the landscape. The darkness had been confronted, and a new dawn had begun,